the Lake District, it's a land of contrasts, from the tranquil lakes to the mountains. Whether bathed in daffodils or basking in autumn sunshine, it's a must-see destination for millions of visitors from all over the world every year. I'm Peter Sidwell, and this is the place I call home. From the hedgerows to the fells, lakes to the sea, there's no shortage of exciting ingredients to get my culinary grey matter working. Now, if your idea of bread is white, sliced and in a plastic bag, it's time to think again. Coming up, a sandwich with a twist, an early morning baking marathon, and a step-by-step guide to making walnut bread.
Welcome to the Lakes on a Plate.
Once, the rivers of the Lake District powered all manner of water mills. From bobbin mills to stone-grinding corn mills, the region was alive with the sound of water-powered industry. Sadly, that's not the case anymore, but there are still a few working examples to be found.
Little Salkeld Watermill is one of the country's few working water-powered corn mills, still producing stone-ground flour the traditional way. Salkeld means spring at the foot of a willow tree, in case you were wondering. Records are scarce, but it's known there's been a mill here since the Middle Ages. The present mill dates back to 1750. It's built from red sandstone, hewn from a small quarry about half a mile away. The mill enjoyed a roaring trade until Thomas Carr built a massive steam-powered mill at Silloth. As a result, by the 1930s, there wasn't much of a living to be had from milling corn. But that was to change in 1974, when the current owners restored the mill and started to produce flour again. Peter's here to meet the man in charge of flour production nowadays, miller Rob Malsom, who's only too keen to explain the milling process.
Well, what we do is we have the wheat delivered from the farms, directly from the farms. We bring it in, we store it, and then it goes through a machine called the winnower. That cleans up the wheat, and then it goes up this auger pipe, and it comes out the top into that wooden hopper there.
Okay.
So we've got the millstones here.
Yeah.
They're inside that wooden box, and the wheat is feeding through. And can you see? There's a bit of wood there that's jiggling about like that. It's getting tapped. So the wheat's feeding down into that, and then it's getting tapped down into the millstone.
And that's where it kind of, the two stones rub together?
That's right. So you've got the top stone.
It's just like this thing here, isn't it?
Exactly.
The machine equivalent of that.
Exactly. So that's the water-powered version. This is a little mini hand-powered version.
And then once that's done, then what happens then?
Well, basically that is wholemeal flour.
That's
Once
wholemeal.
it's gone through those stones, it's fallen down a chute into sacks downstairs, and that's a wholemeal flat. It's as simple as that.
How do we end up with all the other different types of flours then?
Well, in the mill here, what we would do, if we wanted to make white flour, we'd take that wholemeal flour and put it through a sieve.
To get rid of the flakes and...
Yeah, so the sieve takes off things like bran, semolina, and there's a coarser type of flour called middlings.
Right.
It sieves all those off, and basically you get left with white flour.
So can you use the byproduct of when you make white flour, all the little bits that get sieved away, can you use those as well?
Yeah, we can use all of that. I mean, with the bran, we'll sell that to organic farms as feeds.
Right.
The semolina, we sell as semolina. People still buy it. It's quite nice. Sprinkle on, exactly,
Well, sometimes when you make breads, it's quite nice to just throw a handful into there, and it just gives it texture. And sometimes when you're rolling bread out, you get a nice texture on the breads, especially if you're baking on a stone or something like that.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say that our customers here, they sprinkle it on the tops of loaves, and it does give you a nice crunchy crust and all that. So we can use all these byproducts of making the white,
So how many different types of flour are you milling here then?
Well, we do whole wheat or wholemeal, and then what we can do, we can sieve off some bran,
right,
and we call it 85% flour.
Okay.
So we've taken off 15%, which is the bran, and it leaves a lighter flour, but you've still got a lot of the goodness in there.
So you still got lots more, you still got good flavour, like you were telling me.
You've still got some of the flavour, yeah. It's not like white where you've taken out, you know, the bran and the semolina. So it's got a bit more flavour, the 85%, so that might be quite nice.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a really nice dough.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to roll that out, and then I'm going to fill it with the sandwich filling, roll it right back up again, cut them and then bake them so the sandwich filling's all inside.
Yeah.
So that kind of flour, I think that 85% would probably work best for my recipe.
I reckon.
So if we can have a couple of bags of that, that would be great.
No problem. We've got some here, I think, actually. Here we go.
Right, thank you very much.
Voila.
All right, cheers.
Cheers now.
So I've got some really, really nice flour from Salkeld Flour Mill. So what I thought I'd do was make what I call like a filled baked sandwich. And the key to this is we're going to take all the sandwich filling and we're actually going to bake it inside the bread so it doesn't fall out when it's going in your lunchbox. So to start with, I want 500 grams of flour. This is like an 85% white, 15% whole wheat, so it's got some real good flavour in there as well. So that's about 500 grams there. And then we want a sachet of dried yeast. And then just straight into the bowl with that. And then we need to feed the yeast. So we're going to add a teaspoon of sugar. And then we'll also add a teaspoon of salt. That should be enough. And then you need warm water. And that kind of brings the whole thing together. It sort of brings the yeast to life. So just mix the yeast, sugar and salt together so it's all blended through the flour, and then start adding your water. So add a little bit at a time, because when you're adding liquids to things like this, you can never take it out. And kind of use your hand like a claw motion and just sort of twist it and move the bowl about. So keep stirring it round, and when the dough comes clean off your hand and the bowl's clean, then you know it's ready to transfer onto a worktop. So pop that in the sink, and then I'll just grab the flour. We just need a little bit dusting onto the worktop. So just dust that on, and then start kneading it. And the best way is just to keep lifting it towards you and then push it away. And the idea is that we get the gluten activated in this. And it wants to be really sort of stretchy. So as you can see, by kneading the bread, it's kind of absorbed all the flour, and we've got a completely clean worktop, and we've got a really smooth, silky smooth, pliable bread dough. So all I need to do with that is pop it back in the bowl, and then we're going to wrap that in cling film, and we're going to let that prove for about half an hour to 40 minutes. As you can see, it's doubled in size, look. So all we need to do is get some flour, get that back onto the worktop and really knead it and give it some welling. So a little bit of flour on there, and then just scoop the whole thing out. So just give it another knead, and that'll really help on the second prove when it's got the filling inside it, and it'll help keep it all inside. So I just want to divide it into two, because I'm going to do two different fillings for these breads. And then just roll them out of the rolling pin. Use plenty of flour on here because you don't want them to stick at all. Just keep rolling it, and we want a nice long rectangular shape like that. We're going to put some fillings in these. So what I've got is I've got some nice fresh mozzarella, and then some tapenade, which is black olives blended up with some garlic and some anchovy and some rosemary. Just spread it all over the bread. You don't have to use tapenade, you can use anything you like. You can use fresh pesto, you could use chopped up tomatoes, you know, you can use any combination flavour that you like. I just think this tapenade works really well. And then get one of these mozzarellas and then just tear it up. I kind of quite like that kind of rustic, no-nonsense cooking. So that should be enough. And then I'm just going to add a couple of basil leaves just to give a little bit of some little jets of colour and flavour. I absolutely love fresh basil. You just cannot beat the smell. It's such a beautiful flavour and smell. So once you've got it to that stage, from the far side, I want you to roll it over and then just kind of push it away a little bit so we get it really nice and tight. So roll away from you and then towards you, away and towards, until you get all the way up. And everything will get encased inside the bread, so no flavour will escape. The olive tapenade smells fantastic. So I'm going to cut them into sort of man-sized sandwiches. And then I'm going to use these kind of traditional giant Yorkshire pudding tins. And all you need to do is take your sandwich, turn it on its end, and then just pop it in there. And what that does, it kind of helps it stay in shape. So pat it down and just pop them on top there. That's going to be absolutely perfect. Just leave them there to prove for about 30 minutes. They'll double in size and then straight into a hot oven, 200 degrees. The beauty of this recipe is you can try loads of different ingredients. It also works well with English mustard, dry cured Cumbrian ham and a layer of Lancashire cheese. Oh, it's delicious. I've baked these sandwiches for about 20 minutes now and they're nice and golden, so we'll just pull them out. There we go. You can see they're nice and golden and you just tap them on the underside and that means they're cooked. You can find details of this recipe along with all the others featured in the series at channel4.com/4food. After the break, it'll be ridiculously early in the morning and I'll be up to my elbows in flour baking. See you after this.
Lakes on a Plate is sponsored by Lakeland, the home of creative kitchenware.
Every year in the Lake District we welcome over 12 million visitors. That's 12 million hungry mouths to feed, which means an awful lot of bread for an awful lot of sandwiches.
It's bright and early in Keswick, 5 AM to be precise, and Peter's heading out in some typical Lake District weather for the weekly bake-a-thon.
Right guys, got the bread dough here, got overnight proofs. So you've got sun-dried tomato, you've got a pumpkin flour bread, we've got a whole wheat with black treacle, and then we've got a pesto bread there. Yep. So if you guys can crack on over there, I'm going to make a bread over here. Okay. Those guys have got an overnight proved bread there, which means we've made the dough exactly as I'm going to show you now, but then they've put it in a bowl twice as big, and then they've wrapped it up with cling film and left it to prove for about 12 hours. And what that does, it means it's done all the kneading for you, so you don't have to get any elbow grease in there or anything like that, because it's done it. And all you need to do is just shape it and then let it prove once more and can go in the oven. But the way I'm going to do it today is the more conventional method, and that's with a bit of elbow grease. So we've got two types of flour, a little bit of whole wheat there, and then we've got some white as well. So we'll add those two together. I always quite like using a mix of flours because you get a lightness with the white, but then you also get a real depth of flavour. So we've got our two flours. So we'll put this onto the mixer and we're going to start and just bring the dough together with the mixer. So what I want in there is a handful of salt. So we'll put that into there. And then I'm going to add some treacle. And this is black treacle. And this is what gives it that kind of malty flavour. Really, really nice. Kind of that rich homemade bread flavour. Not real strict measurements on the black treacle because, you know, if you don't want it too malty, don't put it all in, but a little bit is really nice. And then what I've got here, this is what I call a ferment. And what this is a mixture of yeast and flour and a tiny bit of sugar. And that gives the yeast some food and that brings it to life. And that's what gives you that real kind of homemade textured crust on the bread, so you don't get that generic soft crust. You get real crispy crunch. So that goes straight in, and one little secret, don't pour it onto the salt, because the salt will instantly kill the yeast. So pour it to the other side of the mixing bowl. Once that's in, and then we'll put the dough hook in, and we'll lift that up there. What we need to do now is add enough water just to bring the dough together. The thing with making bread is, if it's a warm day, you'll find the bread and the flour is far more absorbent of water than if it was a really cold day. We'll get it mixing and then we'll see how it gets on. So the key is, once you've put in half the water, you just need to add a little bit more at a time. And just keep adding a bit more and a bit more at a time until it comes clean off the bowl and it just sits on the dough hook. And just be patient and let it mix together and amalgamate, then add a bit more if it needs it. So we'll turn that off. So once you've got it to that stage, just roll it round to a nice ball, and I'm just going to leave that there for about half an hour while I roast some walnuts and get those really nutty and crunchy, so that when you slice through the bread you get that real texture. So over here, frying pan straight onto the heat. I'm just going to turn that up a little bit. We want this, you don't want it red hot, otherwise you're going to scorch the walnuts straight away. And then a little bit of oil in there. Just vegetable oil's fine, because you don't want to waste your money using good extra virgin olive oil when you're just going to heat it up. And then good handful of walnuts straight into there, maybe a few more. Gives it a real nice texture, a real crunch in the bread. All I need to do is add a little bit of salt. So just sprinkle maybe half a teaspoon of salt into there. And then you can just start to hear it just crackling and starting to roast there. As you can see, they're just starting to go really roasting and golden coloured. What I need to do is get these straight off the heat now. If you don't, and you just leave them on the hob, the residual heat's just going to keep burning them and you'll waste them. So they're ready. The key to it now, a little bit of honey. You don't want them to be really sweet. You just want the honey to contrast with the salt. I'm just going to leave those to cool to one side while we get back to the bread dough. So this bread dough's proved. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stretch it right out as much as I can. So I've got some rosemary. Now if you want, you can chop this really, really fine if you want. But to be honest, I quite like it sort of rough and ready and rustic, and just nice pieces of rosemary in there. If you're going to put rosemary in, you want to know it's rosemary. You don't just want generic herbs. And then I've got some thyme. These are the two herbs that I think work really, really well with breads. Sort of, they're quite robust, quite savoury herbs, these ones. And then the main star, the walnuts, just shake those all over the bread, all the juices and everything. Just get it whacked in there. Pop that up there out the way. And then again, just scatter them around a little bit and just dot them in. And then take the edges and just fold the bread back in. And then the work starts. Bread's a labour of love, really, so the more effort and time you put into making the bread, the better the bread's going to be. There's a lot of artisan bakers that have got very regimented ways of kneading bread, but I just give it some welly. As you can see, it's really, really smooth on the worktop here. It's absorbed all the flour and everything, so that tells me that it's kind of ready to cut and shape. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide this into 6, and then I've got these really, really nice willow baskets that we bought. And we're just going to dust them with a little bit of flour, and then we're going to put the bread dough into these and leave them to prove. And then when they've had like about an hour, they're going to have this beautiful textured sort of swirling crust. And again, it just gives a wonderful crust and texture to the bread. It shows that it's made by hand. So I'm going to cut this straight in half. And what you can see, all these little air pockets, that's the yeast doing its work, and that means it's going to be a really light bread. And you can see all the little nuggets of roasted walnut, so every slice and every bite you get of this bread, you're going to get a little surprise. So cut the dough into approximately 6 pieces. So I can see these breads, and then I can kind of visually look and think, okay, well that one's a bit smaller than that one, so I'll just nick a bit off there and give it to that one. And then that one's a bit smaller, so I'll nick it off and give it to that one. And that one onto that one. And that's ready. So take one piece of dough and then just dust it with a little bit of flour and then turn it over. And then take the dough and stretch it out and turn it in. And do that all the way around the bread. And so I kind of work round the clock. So I'm going anti-clockwise, just taking the bread and tucking it into the middle. And then when you've gone all the way round, flip it over and you've got, and then just run your hands. It's kind of like that one's at 2 o'clock for the clock and that one's at 10. And just put them next to the bread and then just rotate it round. And what you end up with is a perfectly round little loaf. So if you were just making one, that's it, it's done. You could just put that on a tray and then leave it to prove for about 40 minutes, an hour max if you can, and then it would go straight in the oven. But we're using these little willow baskets, so that's going to be the top of the bread. So put that into the basket, and that's the weakest part of the bread. So just nip that bread tight there and then just put that to one side and then just repeat the process. So I'm going to give them about 40 minutes and just give the guys a hand while they're proving. Guys are just turning the breads out now. The rest of these breads have proved for about 30 to 40 minutes and they're ready to go straight into the oven. This oven is a really hot oven. It's at 200 degrees. They're going to take about 20 minutes to cook. Straight in. A step-by-step guide to making this and all the other recipes in the series can be found at channel4.com/4food. Let's face it, there's nothing like freshly baked bread, and I hope you're inspired to hit the kitchen, whether it's filled sandwiches or just a plain loaf. Go on, give it a go. Join me next time for more delicious recipes from local ingredients, all set in the stunning scenery of the Lake District.